Okay, so I want you to picture your morning. You wake up. If you're like me, you shuffle into the kitchen, make your coffee. I let the dog out. But imagine instead that you wake up before dawn, light a fire, and the very first thing you have to deal with is buckets of collected human pee. That's your bleaching agent. That is how you get white linen. Welcome to a day in the life of a Tudor laundress. I promise you, this is going to be perhaps one of my favorite episodes that I've ever done because this is one of those topics where the more you dig, the more you realize that everything you thought you knew about Tudor life was being held together by women whose names we barely remember, doing work that was extraordinary, and being paid almost nothing for it. Also, a big shout out and thank you. There were a couple of people who requested specifically an episode on a day in the life of a Tudor laundress. So here we go. Let's get into it. Hey, friend, welcome back to the Renaissance English History Podcast. I am your host, Heather. I'm delighted that you are here with me today to talk about the Tudor laundress. Again, thank you for the comments on the YouTube videos suggesting this topic. If there are topics or areas that you want me to cover in future episodes, please go ahead and leave a comment wherever you're listening to this, and I will check that out. And who knows, it might be a future episode. All right, let's get started. First, let's talk about the process because it applies to everybody, whether you're washing the king's shirts or taking in washing for the neighborhood. Tudor laundry was not a load of darks on a Wednesday. It was a multi-day production event that disrupted the entire household. The whole process could take up to 4 days in good drying weather, which meant that in England, with its famously cooperative climate, it could take considerably longer. So here's the thing that reframes a lot of what we think about with Tudor hygiene, and I find this a little bit mind-blowing. Tudor people did not think about cleanliness the way that we do. They weren't regularly washing their bodies with hot water, partly because of real fears that open pores would let in disease. What they washed instead was linen. The linen shift or smock that you wore against your skin was the technology. It absorbed the sweat and the oils and the general having a bodiness, and then you washed that frequently. The outer garments, the gorgeous velvets and silks and embroidered kirtles that you see in portraits, those weren't washed. They were brushed and aired and spot cleaned. And here's the proof that this actually worked. The historian Ruth Goodman, who wrote the brilliant book, How to Be a Tudor, which I love, she actually tested this herself and she talks about it in her book, What It's Like. She followed the Tudor linen regime for over 3 months in the modern world, changing her linen regularly but not bathing. And, spoiler alert, nobody noticed. Not one person. As a kind of control experiment, a colleague tried the opposite. He showered every day, but wore the same unwashed linen for months. And the result was that within a very short time, he had quite a distinctive odor about him. So the laundress was not a luxury. She was the actual hygiene system in Tudor England. Now let's talk about the process. The main washing method for tougher items was called bucking. You soaked the linen in lye, which is an alkaline solution made by filtering water through wood ash repeatedly. For bleaching, you used urine, specifically what they cheerfully called chamber lye. It sounds really gross, but the chemistry is actually sound. Urine is alkaline and contains ammonia, which is a genuine bleaching and cleaning agent. Households collected it and the laundress used it. For finer linens, you would use soap. Tudor black soap had a jelly-like consistency and was made by boiling fat with lye. It sounds disgusting, and it also sounds exactly like something that somebody would sell at a farmer's market today, but I digress. After washing, everything got spread out on dry grass, hedges, and bushes. Clothes pegs did not really exist yet, so you just draped things on whatever you had. And white linen was a status symbol. The whiter your linen, the wealthier you were, because getting linen truly white required repeated bleaching, which required time and labor. So every time you saw someone in brilliant white linen, you were seeing the invisible hours of a laundress. All right, now let's talk about the three very different lives lived doing this work. At the top of the laundress hierarchy, if you will, quite literally at Hampton Court next to the Thames, we have the royal laundresses. Henry VIII's laundress was a woman named Anne Harris. And I want to just take a moment to appreciate that we know her name. We know her name because she shows up in the royal financial accounts. And she shows up there because her job was remarkable. Anne was paid £10 a year, which was a pretty good salary for the time. But, and this is the part that gets me, her contract specifically stated that she had to provide her own soap. She's washing the king's linen and she has to bring her own supplies. There's something like very 21st century gig worker, contract worker about that, like honestly. At Hampton Court, the laundry complex was outside the main building, right by the river. Courtiers wore linen smocks against their skin to protect their elaborate outer garments. And those smocks, along with all of the bed linen for hundreds of people, generated a staggering amount of washing. There was literally an army of women working there every single day. For the larger items, like sheets, you would take off your shoes and your socks and you pummeled the laundry clean with your feet in a large tub called a buck tub. For smaller items, you used a board. And for pressing and smoothing, you used a slick stone, a small, cold, mushroom-shaped piece of glass that you pressed across the linen to smooth out the creases. No heat, just pressure and technique. Now, here's the part of the royal laundress's job that I find the most extraordinary, and that is the discretion requirement. Think about what the laundress knew because she washed the sheets. She washed the king's personal linen. She knew things. She knew when Catherine of Aragon and Henry were actually sharing a bed and when they weren't. She could track a pregnancy by what she was or wasn't washing. She had information that courtiers would have paid a small fortune for. The historian Amy License put it perfectly. The laundress washing the king's shirts and underclothing had access to his privy chambers and knew the most intimate secrets of his body. And she had to act like she knew, like absolutely nothing. The job description for a royal laundress was essentially extraordinary physical labor, deep chemical knowledge, and the discretion of a confessor. Also, you had to buy your own soap. And then, once ruffs became fashionable in the later Tudor Elizabethan period, a whole new specialization emerged. And the story of how ruffs came to England is one of my favorites because it involves a refugee entrepreneur and it is so good. So in 1564, a Flemish woman named Dingen van der Plas arrived in London with her husband. They had fled Flanders to escape the religious violence of the Duke of Alva, looking, as the sources put it, for their better safeties. And Dingen looked at London, looked at the growing fashion for ruffs, and looked at the fact that nobody in England knew how to starch them properly. And she opened up a starch-making business. She charged very high prices, trained apprentices, including noblewomen's daughters who paid to learn the technique, and built an enterprise out of a skill that she brought with her as a refugee. Can you even believe that? She flees religious persecution and then turns it into a thriving Tudor small business. Because here is what ruffs required. By Elizabeth's reign, they could be made of up to 10 yards of fine linen, set into hundreds of tiny pleats using starch and a heated iron. The laundress had to starch the ruff, set every pleat individually with a hot, pointed iron, and then pray it didn't rain, because if it rained, the starch dissolved, and then you started from scratch. A special laundress was employed just to deal with the ruffs every single day. One source described it as work so demanding that Elizabeth's own laundresses might have agreed with the moralist Philip Stubbs, who declared that starch had been invented by the devil. Quick pause here because if you are enjoying this, please do hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this if you haven't already. I put out videos and audio podcasts on Tudor history most days of the week, and there's so much more where this came from. Okay, back to the laundry. So level 2, the gentry household laundress. So let's step down from the palace now and into the kind of large manor house or noble household that most Tudor people with money would have lived in. This is the gentry level, and this is where things get dramatic. In a household like this, the laundress was usually one of several servants. She might have had someone to help her, and she was doing essentially the same work as her royal counterpart, but with less of everything. Less prestige, less pay, less narrative consequence if she made a mistake. The washing still happened, the bucking and the lye and the spreading on the grass. The process doesn't change, but the social position is different. And I want to tell you about a woman called Bess Holland, because Bess Holland is one of my favorite, wait, what? People in Tudor history. Bess worked in the household of Elizabeth Stafford, the Duchess of Norfolk, specifically as a laundress in the nursery. For 8 years of bucking tubs and spreading linen and getting up before dawn. And then she became the mistress of Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, who was the Duchess's own husband, and really a terrible person, but that's a different story. Now, the Duchess, understandably furious, wrote a letter in which she described Bess as, and I'm quoting directly here, a churl's daughter who was but a washer in my nursery for 8 years. But a washer. That phrase is like doing so much work. It's not just an insult, it's classic panic. The Duchess isn't just angry that her husband has a mistress, she's outraged that the woman comes from the laundry. The implication being, how could someone that far below us end up here? But Bess ended up there precisely because she was in the household, visible, present, in a role that required proximity and trust, and apparently that proximity worked in her favor. The laundress moved through the spaces that visitors didn't. She was in the private rooms, handling the intimate objects. She was trusted, at least to a point, because she had to be. And Bess Holland's story is a reminder that the servants' world was not as sealed off from the noble world as the Duchess would have liked. Now here's where we get to my favorite, honestly. The woman who is not attached to any household, who is out there on her own, taking in washing, working by a river or stream, building something that barely has a name in the historical record, but is one of the most interesting economic stories of the period. The independent washerwoman was usually a widow, or a woman who never married, operating in the narrow band of trades where a woman could work without being attached to a husband's guild membership or a husband's protection. Washing was one of those trades. You needed skill, you needed strength, you needed knowledge of the process, and you needed basically zero startup capital beyond your own hands in a pot and, the soap, which we mentioned. Now, the economics were brutal. The pay was low. It was piecework, essentially, taking in washing from neighbors, local tradespeople, inns, whoever needed it. You worked outdoors in all weather. You had no fixed employer, which, sounds kind of like freedom, but in Tudor England was actually quite dangerous because Tudor legislation was suspicious of what they called masterless people, and unmarried women working and living alone were the most suspicious category of all. There are records of women being removed or whipped or imprisoned for vagrancy, simply for being unattached women working independently. So you're doing backbreaking work in the cold for low pay, and also the law viewed your entire existence as probably slightly criminal. And then there's the reputation issue, which we need to handle carefully because it says a lot more about the society than about the women themselves. So laundresses became associated with sex work in the Tudor imagination, and this was partly economic reality and partly social projection. The pay was so low that some women did supplement their income in that way. But the association ran deeper than that. There was something about women doing intimate physical work, handling personal items, being accessible and visible in public spaces that the period's anxious morality attached itself to. They were called lavenders, from the Latin lavare, to wash, like lava sus manos, wash your hands, that thing. The same root that has given us the word launder. There's a 16th century poem called The Ship of Fools that calls a woman my lavender laundress without any let. And the double meaning is very much fully intended. So here's what we need to take from this, though. The independent washerwoman was, in a real sense, running a real business. She had real clients, she had real skill, and she had a reputation in her community for her quality of work. White linen was a status symbol, which meant the person who produced the whiteness had genuine value to offer. Some of these women were supporting families, Some were widows keeping households together after their husbands died. They were doing something important and remarkable, which was surviving in a world that gave them almost zero structural support, using the one thing that nobody could outsource, which was the willingness to do the work. So here's the thing that I kind of take away after going down this particular rabbit hole, which is that the king could not project divine majesty in gray, sour-smelling linen. The court at Hampton Court functioned because someone was up before dawn by the river with her feet in a buck tub. The Duchess of Norfolk's household ran on the labor of women like Bess Holland, whom the Duchess was then furious to have to acknowledge as a real person. Out in London and in villages across England, women were building autonomous economic lives out of washing other people's dirty laundry and being viewed with suspicion for the audacity of surviving without male supervision. And a Flemish refugee named Dingen van der Plas arrived with nothing but a skill and a bucket of starch and built a business that outfitted the most fashionable court in Europe. The laundress is invisible in the historical record almost by design. She wasn't at guild meetings, she wasn't writing letters that got preserved, she was just there every day holding this whole thing together, making sure that everybody looked respectable and knowing more secrets than almost anybody in the building. History is so full of people like that. I love learning about them. I love thinking about the people today who are doing that work that doesn't get people making videos about it or doesn't appear in newsletters or newspapers, but they're like literally driving the economy and they're literally making our lives possible. So I think we need to talk more about those kinds of people doing that invisible work, and I'm glad we talked about the laundress today. So we will leave it there, my friend. Definitely check out that book, The Ruth Goodman How to Be a Tutor. I think I've used her book before in my podcast in different episodes. It's absolutely fantastic. And of course, she has TV shows that you can watch. Some of them are on Amazon. They were on like the BBC. So if you're in the UK, you can probably watch it on iPlayer. If you know how to do that in the US, you can check them out. She's fantastic. Absolutely amazing. So highly recommend that. Yeah, and I guess that's all I have to say. If you enjoyed this one, of course, I would appreciate a press of that like button wherever you're listening. And I hope I earned your subscription again wherever you're listening to this, because I do put out lots of videos like this. And it's people like you subscribing and leaving comments that keeps me going and keeps this podcast going. So leave me a comment below telling me which of the three women you would most want to have a conversation. I have a guess which one you're going to pick. I know which one I would pick, but let me know which one you would pick of the three different types of laundresses that we talked about. Remember, my friend, you are deeply loved. I am so glad I shared the planet with you. You make the world a better place, and I'm grateful we got to spend this time with each other today talking about the Tudor laundress. I'll be back very, very soon. In the meantime, don't forget to drink your water. Bye-bye, friend.
Blow, northern wind, a scentful baby sweating. Blow, northern wind, blow, blow, blow. Ich hatte Bord in Bauerbrick, dat soll is semli